So if you want to inspire play, you have to create a vision that's interesting to the players. They have to yeah, I want that. I want to do that with you. And that inspires the spirit of play.
Why do growing businesses go broke? Welcome to the Profit Answer Man podcast. I'm Rocky Lalvani, and I help 7 and 8 figure business owners scale profits and cash flow while working less. Every week, we dig into proven methods like the Profit First system, other cash flow strategies, and real execution. No accounting jargon, no fluff. If you're going to be the backbone of America, creating jobs and serving your mission, you deserve to be well rewarded. We're Profit First certified professionals. If you want the masterclass, check out episodes 2 through 13, including Mike Michalowicz, where I break down the entire Profit First book, chapter by chapter. If you want, grab your free copy of the Profit Blueprint book at profitcomesfirst.com and start making profit a habit today. You built this business to serve your mission and your freedom. Let's make sure it pays you back. We also offer strategic tax planning and preparation to help you keep more of that profit. Now let's dive in. Imagine buying your first company at 24. Almost no clue on how to read a P&L and a balance sheet. No real leadership. And then the market collapses. You keep it alive for 4.5 years, and it still ends in bankruptcy. Most people quit. Not our guest today. Mike Chaput did the opposite. He rebuilt, launched Insight, and scaled it into a $35 million managed IT services businesses with about 150 employees. And he's never had a red month. In this episode, we get into the real discipline behind the deals you must not sign, the accountability conversations most leaders avoid, and why vision plus an operating system is what turns chaos into a scoreboard that you win with. Let's meet Mike. Welcome to the Profit Answer Man, Mike Chaput. It's great to have you join us today.
Thank you, Rocky. Pleasure to be here.
And I'm excited to learn from you. Can you share a little bit about yourself and your business?
Sure thing. So I run a business called Insight. We are a IT managed service provider. We're based in California, primarily the Bay Area and the San Diego Bay and a little bit of Orange County. We have about 150 employees, approximately 35 million in revenue. The business was founded in 2004. And as you know from my bio, it's not my first business. It's actually my second business. When I was 24 years old, that's too young to do this, by the way, if you have any listeners of that age, I actually bought somebody's business. And maybe the most interesting thing that I've ever done was I kept that business alive for 4.5 years before it went bankrupt. And it probably should have gone bankrupt in 3 months because it sold networking equipment, and we bought it January of 2000. It sold networking equipment and installed networking equipment. And I was 24 years old. I didn't know how to read a balance sheet. I barely understood a profit and loss statement. I never led anybody. I never sold anything. And here I am operating this business that it was in a marketplace that after the dot-com bubble crashed, the demand inverted. And there was basically no demand for networking, installation, and equipment. In fact, there was a glut of equipment out on the secondary market and nobody necessary to install it. And we had to make a pivot pretty early to try to keep the doors open. And we did survive for about 4.5 years, but ultimately, the short story is we developed this software business. That's kind of how we kept our business alive. And the very small team of software developers walked out the door with the business, and we couldn't afford to make our ends meet. And we ended up going bankrupt in 2004. Yeah, that was kind of nuts. And then we maybe did a crazy thing. We decided to keep trying the entrepreneurship hand, and we started Insight. And my business partner and I have been together the whole time. So we went bankrupt together. We started Insight together. We're still together today. He was my college roommate in my undergraduate education at Michigan State University. And yeah, we built Insight into something kind of significant. It's been a lot of fun, but because I was so young when I got started, I kind of I don't know, I'm 50 years old and I have 25 years, 26 years, I suppose, of experience as a CEO. So yeah, that's kind of the skeleton of my story. You can double click anywhere you like.
What were the biggest lessons you learned from the bankruptcy?
The bankruptcy itself, I don't think actually is as interesting of a lesson as as the 4.5 years and all the decisions that we made that led to the bankruptcy. I mean, it started when we purchased a business without properly, let's say, due diligence on the business. That was maybe the first problem, is because we didn't really know how, and we were so focused on trying to get the credit and the loans and make the deal happen. We were so excited to try to be entrepreneurs that we weren't willing to walk away. So kind of lesson number one is, I learned this way too late. There's a guy named Herb Cohen who wrote a book called Negotiate This or Negotiate Anything. And he has this concept of, you have to care, but not that much. Well, we really wanted this deal to happen. And because we wanted it to happen so badly, we didn't qualify it out. So we ended up in a bad deal, not just in the business that we purchased, but the first big decision we made was re-signing a really bad lease that was too much space. It was too high quality space, and it was way too much monthly commitment for our business. And it soaked every last little tiny bit of cash flow that we needed to survive. And when you put that along with the debt that we used to buy the thing, we just got upside down. So the first thing I learned, was like, negotiate good deals, because bad deals sustain for really long durations of time. And so, so that was probably number one. And then number two was, you have to be really, you want to be a default trust person. So, like, it's really kind of important. Most people are good actors and rely on reputation, but there are bad actors in the world, and people who will say whatever they have to get whatever they can for themselves. And there are signs for that. And in the case of the software developer that led the business that walked out on us, there were plenty of signs to know that we were, let's say, getting attached to deals, agreements with somebody who had a history of not keeping their agreements with us. And ultimately that really, really killed us. So yeah, I learned to really be cautious about basically agreements that you enter in with people, and the deals you negotiate, and even more like who you negotiate with and who you decide to make agreements with. Because the reality is, you can't really, it's not practical, especially when you're small, to rely on a legal system. It's like you don't have enough money to do that. You don't have enough cash flow. So you really need people to go by their word as much as absolutely possible. And so maybe those were some of the key lessons I learned. But really, Rocky, the story of this company that went bankrupt, called PCS Networks, was something more like, I learned some core business stuff. Like, I learned how to run a financial engine, like a profit and loss statement and a balance sheet, and what they meant, and cash flows. I learned how to sell, and that was absolutely critical for the success of Insight. And to some degree, I was part of entrepreneur organization in San Francisco, and I learned how to network and make connections with other people. And I grew a discipline of constantly learning. I read a book a week pretty much well, I probably kept that habit all the way to COVID. So, I was reading one nonfiction book a week for almost 20 years. And I started doing that when I was a young person. And so those were the things that ultimately, I think, led to the success of the second venture.
That is a lot of books.
That's for sure. I think it's more than 1,000 books. In retrospect, it would have been a really wise idea to have chronologued all those books. At one point in time, I didn't think I needed to, because most of them were audio, and then the paperbacks, they were there. So I always, the way I did this habit is, I was listening to a book on audio on my way, to and from work or to sales appointments. And I'd usually do a nonfiction on the way to work and a fiction on the way home. And then if the book was really particularly interesting, then I would get the paperback copy and I would go through it a second time with a highlighter. And of course, then I would distribute it to team members. And so that was kind of the philosophy. But you're right, it was a lot of books.
What were your biggest insights that you learned through the financials? Because I've found a lot of business owners are allergic to their financials.
Well, for me, at first, it was just understanding basic accounting and really understanding the nature of how profit and loss statements interact with the balance sheet and so on and so forth, and understanding how profit and loss wasn't the same as cash flow and those really basic stuff. In When I started the second business called Insight, I also simultaneously joined a peer group. And the peer group met 3 times a year and was people in my exact industry. And then what we did was we all reconstituted our general ledger such that everything rolled up into the exact same bucket so that we could compare expense ratios with people in our industry. And that's where maybe the more of the financial planning and analysis piece kind of came into play, where I could see like, oh my gosh, like all the guys in my peer group are spending 3 to 6% on revenue on their rent, and our rent in the original thing was like 20% of revenue. And then you're just like, well, no wonder we're not able to make any cash flow. The problem is right there. It's not in our billable rates. It's not in how much we pay our people. Here's the problem. There's the entire gap of cash flow break even and the 15% target we should be aiming at. It's right here. And so, when we started Insight, we already knew how to sell. We already knew how to run a pretty good business. And so we reconstituted we resized to just really small at first and just grew from there. But we never, an interesting thing about Insight is we've never had a red month. Never. Like we've been a double-digit black company every single month for 26 years. People are like, oh, knock on wood. It's like, well, we don't even need to knock on wood. It's a discipline. It's not luck or it's not chance. It's decisions. It's like, this is a constraint. And we just play our business game inside of that constraint.
What is the discipline that allowed that to occur?
Well, when you go bankrupt, that's another thing. Like if you touch a stove, you're unlikely to touch a stove again. I mean, having lived 4.5 years basically with cash flow being just absolutely hand to mouth and then ending in a bankruptcy makes you really not want to go through that again. So if you think about probably why most people, I already know, so maybe this will be an interesting topic to get into. At Insight, we love people. Like we love our people, we love our customers. You know what I mean? Like we're really a human company. And so the mistake that we're going to make on the business front, if we allow ourselves to, is to be kind of overly empathetic to poor performers, both customers and employees. Like we're likely to make the error of not taking the appropriate action when we have like a poor performing employee or something like that. And the manager who doesn't, let's say, take the appropriate action when that occurs, because that's like, if you think about where your profit problems are, like if you run SG&A right, you kind of know what your rent should be. You kind of know how much you should be spending on the various buckets. So where typically people go off is they either have really poor performing contracts with their customers, or they have really bad. They're paying too much for a non-productive asset internally, like a human asset. So they're not managing their human costs appropriately. Okay, so why do managers do this? Well, the story they tell themselves is, I really care about this human. This human has a family. They need this job. I don't want to let them go because I'm such a good person. I don't want to deal with this, right? But the reality is what? They don't want a difficult conversation. They don't want social rejection. They want approval from people. The manager does. So the pain of having to go have a difficult conversation with a poor performing human, that's a significant bottleneck for a lot of managers and leaders. And so they don't want to deal with that pain, but that's because they've never had to deal with maybe they've never had to deal with the bigger pain of running an organization that goes bankrupt or can't pay their employees. So they just middle in this like barely profitable zone and then never take on the difficulties necessary to ascend to a much more high performing point, so I don't know if you're following my track.
I do, but how do you get your managers to do that then? How do you get them to hold people accountable, to do it nicely, but still have expectations?
Well, okay, so I mean, some of it's just philosophy, but some of it's like, some of it's accountability all the way down from the leader. So it reminds me of this one scenario where we had a manager that wasn't, let's say, had a poor performing team. And It's like everybody had this intuition, and you're like, well, we should deal with that manager. But as a leader, you're like, well, if there's a manager in between, then that's the manager that needs to be dealt with first. So it's like you have to deal with this manager first, and maybe they need to face demotion, or maybe they need to move on or whatever, because their job is to make sure that manager performs, and they're not doing that. Otherwise, if you go direct down to the manager down here, then you still have this poor performing manager that's not holding their managers accountable. So it really comes all the way back up to the very top, if you really think about it that way. So it's ultimately it's the CEO, or it's the president, if you will, that's actually the problem in all cases. Because the way I look at it is you're the problem.
So, what do you do when you're the problem? Because let's face it, when it comes to finances, if you're not looking at the numbers, you're the problem. When it comes to holding people accountable or picking the right people, if you're not doing it, you're the problem. You talked about working with your college roommate all these years, and you guys have had a successful relationship. A lot of times, what I see with business owners, we're going to do a whole episode on this, is what do you do when your family member, your college roommate, your wife's brother, who all work for your company, don't perform? Like, you got to have that hard conversation, and most business owners don't.
So it's a hierarchy of values. So what you've done is you've said, this usually occurs, by the way, when performance is, let's say, adequate, or it's like nobody is dying. It's like the business is paying its bills, and it's throwing off it's like when things are really bad, there's no choice. You have to deal with that. So usually it's like it's this middling kind of not very good performance that it's kind of like enabling, this bad behavior. And what the CEO or the leader is essentially saying is that this human being, this individual human being, in my relationship with them is worth more than optimizing for every other constituency in the business. And this is like, you might think of this as like a big problem in a family business, right? Because who's to say that they're wrong? It's like it's their hierarchy of values. It's like the family is the most important thing, and the fact that maybe customer service isn't as good, and maybe employees are detuned, performance is detuned, growth is detuned, isn't as important as making sure that the people who work in the family continue to work in the family together. But you're ultimately you're casting a hierarchical value.
Well, I was going to say, when you do that, though, don't your other employees who aren't part of the family go, I've had enough?
Well, this kind of dovetails a little bit into the area of vision and values that you and I talked to. What you do is you establish your vision statement becomes a default, and your core values become default too. So whatever you make the decisions on, that's your real culture, and that's your real vision. So what you're saying is the vision of this company is to make sure that family members are employed, and my core values are such. And so that's never going to inspire anybody who's not part of that subgroup. And when you don't have a uniting set of values or uniting set of vision, you force every single other person in your organization to come to work for economic incentive only. And so I talk about this book all the time, because it's science, but there's a book called Prime to Perform by two researchers, Doshi and McGregor. And the interesting part of them is they found that there were 6 sources of motive, and they were derivatives from the work itself. So you can imagine you're doing work, and if you love to do that work, that's called play. And that's the greatest source of motive. Like, if it's play to you, you're just going to do it because it's fun. And the second source is one derivative away, is purpose. It's like, I might not love this part of the work, but I believe in what we're trying to accomplish, and what the work is going to yield. And the third is something called potential. And that's the third derivative. And that's like, well, I don't really believe in this mission, and the work's not play to me, but like it'd be like I'm law clerking because I want to be a lawyer. And I don't like the law firm or what they do. And I don't, it's now below those, and those 3 are actually correlated to higher levels of performance. It's not linear though. It's play is by far is like twice as valuable as purpose, is twice as valuable as potential. But the three below it are economic pressure, emotional pressure, and inertia. And whenever you're working for economic pressure, emotional pressure, inertia, it's correlated to negative performance. And they've researched this across surveys. They've surveyed human beings. They've looked at performance of the organizations. And it's pretty much like unarguable data. That's why I reference the book. Now, when you have an organization that doesn't have a core purpose, then you force people to show up in your organization for economic reasons only, and work sucks for them. Like they're not having any fun. And you don't inspire, like you might say, well, what inspires play and work? And it's not always what people think. It's like I use a video game analogy for it. It's like when I have kids, they're older now. I have a 22-year-old son and an 18-year-old son. And when they were boys, we used to play Minecraft together. And when I first showed up in the Minecraft world, like it was kind of boring. There was nothing to do. We didn't know what we were doing, and it wasn't very fun. But once we said, hey, let's build a tower, like a castle. Like once we had a goal, like we also had jobs. Like we had to go mine stuff. We had to figure things out. We had to invent tools. But we had a goal, and the game became fun, like almost like super addictive. Like we couldn't get enough of seeing our tower manifest. It was like, so if you want to inspire play, you have to create a vision that's interesting to the players. They have to like, yeah, I want that. I want to do that with you. And that inspires the spirit of play. So if you're running the show that's like all about making sure that a family member has a job, that's not an interesting vision. Like nope, you're not going to invoke the spirit of play in anybody in that scenario. All you're going to do is keep that family member in a job. And what's worse is so this goes back to the original conversation. So this employee who's not performing, like, why they're motivated. They're motivated based on economic pressure, emotional pressure, inertia. Because if they were performing, they would be motivated by play, purpose, and potential. So that they're down there, they're low performing, and they're in this work as toil land. And so when you let them go, you actually release them to go find work that's actually play for them. They're going to have a much better life, and here's the other interesting part. When it's play, they're going to be higher performing. And you tell me, Rocky, what happens economically if your performance is great?
You make more money.
It's so obvious. Like, I don't even have to say it. So you let somebody go because they're in this low performing land, which means they're motivated by economic pressure, emotional pressure. But when you let them go, they learn the lesson necessary to go find work that's interesting to them so that they embody the spirit of purpose and play. And then what happens naturally is they do better economically. Like, so all you're doing by keeping them in this low performance land is inhibiting their growth as a human from doing better things, living their best life. It sucks, but sometimes like people have to go into the pit before they can ascend. And sometimes as a leader, it's your job to send them there, even though you love them. But you do it out of love. You say, like, I love you, and you need to go to the depths and reconstitute some issues in your life and figure out what you really want to do and how you want to show up so that you can live a better life in the future. I can't put you in this purgatory where you just have enough to pay your bills and just do enough scraping the edge to get fired. And I would say if you love a family member, keeping them in low performance land, like you think they're happy, like it's not like they're not happy. Look, if their performance is really bad at work, they're not in play zone. And so, they're not happy.
What do you normally find? Because I can tell you, I can walk into a business, I can tell if they're in play mode or if they're not. And, a classic example, it's not like this today, but when you used to fly on Southwest, you could tell they were playing. They were having fun. Nowadays, maybe not so much. But most businesses I walk into, it doesn't seem like people are there for the paycheck. They haven't created the atmosphere to make it fun and to attract the kind of people who want to have that kind of fun. It doesn't seem the norm. Is it the norm, or am I just out of sorts here?
It's 100% not the norm. And when the profit and so this is the kind of, we talk about hot takes and all this kind of stuff. So this is kind of maybe I don't know if we're going to disagree or whether we're going to agree on this, but I don't look at the purpose of businesses to make a profit. I look at it differently. Like, to me, it's a constraint. Like, businesses must make profit because that's the game. It's like, it's not the purpose of a basketball team to stay in balance. It's necessary. So like, you have to stay inside the lines, or you can't play the game. But it's not really the purpose. The purpose of a business has to be something different. And the reason why I don't think it can be the purpose is because it's incredibly unmotivating. And it forces the entire company into this economic pressure land. What you really want to do is say, hey, we're trying to build a castle. And we really think that's a cool thing to go off and do. And we're looking for other people who want to build this castle. That's your vision statement. Like, the castle is an analogy. But we're trying to build a castle. We want to build a castle. Now, it's necessary for us to build a castle to make profit. Why? Well, because we have a capital table, and if they don't get returns, they're going to pull out and they're going to replace me as the CEO. That's one reason. And it's necessary to make profits because we need cash flow. And if we grow, the cash flows are going to be necessary to fund the growth. That's another reason why we need it. And the third reason why we need it is we need a scoreboard. We need to know when we're winning. We need something to measure performance against and all these other kinds of things. So profit is a constraint. It's a game constraint. It's part of the rule board. But if the purpose is to follow the rules, like then you're all is lost. It's like, no, that's the rules of capitalism. We have to do this. Here's how we know we're doing well. This is kind of the number. I think for most business, for my business, it's like 15 to 20% net margin. Like when we're there, we're in that zone. We're kind of winning with a target of 17. It's like,
I think a lot of people would be happy at 17. A lot of people, first of all, don't even have a scoreboard. They don't have a goal. And this is a very difficult point to get across. The purpose of business is to make money. And I don't mean it against what you're saying, right? It doesn't mean we can't have fun making money. As a matter of fact, if you can have fun and make money, God bless you, all the more way to do it. And we shouldn't say we're here to make money, no fun allowed, because no one's going to work for you. They have to come together. They're not separate and distinct. But at the end of the day, if we all have fun and we build a tower, but we don't have cash, well, no one's going to get paid, and then no one's going to show up for the most part. At least not regularly.
It doesn't make it a purpose, though. So this is where
you're right. It's a balance.
Think of it this way. Here's another way to think. You got to get kind of philosophical and expand out a little. Like, we take for granted. We live in a time and a place where we take for granted things like our power is on when we turn on the lights. Our internet works. There's food in our grocery stores. There's mechanics to repair our cars, and there's clothes that show up when we Amazon. We take these things for granted, but the reality is that there's a lot of people that have to wake up at 8 in the morning to make sure that we all have good lives and end at 5 and do stuff all day long. Like, there's a lot of human beings for us to live this kind of civil life where we're safe and we have all of our things. A lot of people have to do stuff. And the capitalistic system is a way of organizing all those behaviors. And so I look at the purpose of a corporation not to make money so much as it is to take their little sector and execute on it well, such that part of the overall economic engine and system works. Now, what we know for sure, where you and I completely agree, is you will cease to exist in organizing human behavior if you can't do it in a way in this capital system where you make money. Like, I look at it as there are kind of 3 major constituencies in the fourth one of any corporation. You have employees, you have shareholders, you have customers. And the fourth ecosystem is like your business partners and associates. But like, I look at leadership as a balancing act, like a 3-legged stool. Like, employees have to get enough economically to keep showing up. Customers have to get enough economically to keep showing up. But the one that's missing is your capital table needs to be taken care of well enough. Otherwise, you're probably not the right CEO. Like, and your capital should be managed by somebody else who can yield, because like, you have capital at risk. Why do you have your capital at risk in this enterprise? Like, to get a return is the answer. And if you're not getting a return, you should change your capital into somebody else who can give you a return. That's how capitalism works. So I look at it, you have to balance that enterprise. And if you do it right, all parties rise. It's like employees can get more, customers can get better service, and your capital table can get a superior return. That's a well-managed business. That's what a CEO's job is to do, is to make sure all these constituencies get their return.
And I'm in total agreement there. And I think we don't have a good way of explaining that in a way that people get both sides of it. Because I know a lot of people think making a profit is greedy. And it's not, because you can't pay the people, you can't cover the debt, you can't build the tower without being able to do that.
Or
so
how about pay taxes? About 50% of the profit goes to either a state or to a Federal Reserve, which, hopefully would provide a blanket of civil services and security over the entire thing. So if you're not making any money, guess what happens to your society? Like, it all goes to...
It does. And that's why it all has to go together. So let's shift gears a little bit. I am a big fan of vision and culture, which we've talked about, but then we need an operating system. We need a way to get this done. And I'd like to hear your feedback, the pluses, the minuses, because I always try and tell my clients, we have to install an operating system. And they look at, I don't have time for that. I'm like, if you don't have time, you need a system.
Well, so, I have a long history with this. So you mentioned scaling up before we entered the podcast. And that's it. That was an interesting mention to me because I want to say in 2002, so think I'm 26 years old. I managed to get through the first 2 years of being upside down in this business and pay my bills. I'm part of EO San Francisco. And I remember showing up. If you've ever seen the San Francisco city skyline, back in that time, there were two iconic buildings. There was 555 California, and there was the tower, the Transamerica Tower. Now there's the Salesforce building, and there's a bunch of other towers. But back then, those are the two biggest buildings. And we're at the top of 555 California, and Vern himself was the speaker for my event. And he gave out these signed books of Rockefeller Habits. This is 1.0, by the way, of Rockefeller Habits for anybody out there who follows it. And at the time, I'd spent a bunch of time reading Jim Collins, Built to Last, Good to Great. And at that time, I remember reading Jack Welch's Winning and taking a bunch of philosophical principles from there. And it seemed to me like Vern was just kind of thieving off of these thought leaders out there in the marketplace. And I didn't pay much attention to his presentation. I felt like it was stuff I already knew. I took his signed book, I put it on my bookshelf, and I don't know why, but I let it go for like 2 years. At some point in time, I picked the thing up and I read it. So again, this is Rockefeller Habits 1.0. And I was like, oh my God, this is actually really good. It's like a manual. It's like a tool. It's not about philosophy and ideas. It's about implementation. And I was like, we should do this. Like, we should fill out this form, and there was instruction on how to do it. So by the time we launched Insight, we started doing the one-page business plan from Vern Harnish, Rockefeller's Habit 1.0. Okay, it was really, really hard for us. So we had just come off of a bankruptcy. We barely had any money. Well, barely. Like we have about as, I think it was maybe $50,000 or $70,000 of home equity was basically what that's what we had, and that was okay. It was enough to try to figure out how to get our next business launched. And for cash flow reasons, we were selling retainers because we needed the cash up front. We were discounting our rates and trying just to generate enough cash. We bootstrapped Insight completely. My business partner and I own the entire capital table. So we started doing Rockefeller's Habits. So now the first thing that, if people haven't done this yet, and by the way, to me, Rockefeller Habits and EOS or Traction or the Gino Wickman version of it, they're like potato, tomato. Like they both include the same kind of things. Like they have different language. If I wasn't doing any of them, probably EOS is a little bit more approachable. It makes things a little bit simpler than Rockefeller Habits. It's like all Gino did was take Vern's thing and kind of put his own language and wrapper around it. And instead of a one-page business plan, you have a vision traction organizer, but it's kind of the same idea. I'm kind of indifferent to the two. But if you do it, when you first start, you can kind of see tomorrow, but you're kind of like 10 years, like vision and values. It's kind of confusing, especially when you're hand to mouth on cash flow and stuff. You're just kind of like, I don't know how to like think big and strategic and all that stuff. And by the way, when we tried to do core values, this was like a really interesting point. When we tried to do core values, it was really hard. It was hard to agree on what they were. It was hard to come up with good ones. It was hard to come up with complete ones. And when we finally got, it took so much time and meetings and arguments and debate amongst the managers and leaders that when we finally came up with them, we were like, didn't want to touch it again. And we're like, that's it. That's done forever, because that was annoying. And that was maybe a big mistake because we didn't get the values right on the first go round. And they actually led to some bad behavior in an organization that held us back, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Is maybe a story for another day. But it's my opinion that maybe the most important thing of either the one-page business plan or the vision traction organizer is to create the appropriate uniting principles for your organization, not necessarily the daily action. So the way I conceptualize this, and maybe I'll throw it back to you once I give this analogy to see what you think. I think about it like your vision traction organizer or one-page business plan is like your blueprint for the house that you're going to build in the future. You're going to ask your team to build a house. And it's not enough to tell them, I want a house. Like, that's not enough information. They don't know what to do. So if you look at a set of blueprints, it has kind of a big picture of the house on the front. That's not enough to build the house. Like, when you open up the plans, there's a bunch of subsequent plans. There's your structural plan, there's your roofing plan, there's your plumbing plan, your electrical plan. And inside those plans, there's an enormous amount of detail from what switch is going to be on the wall. Is it going to be one of those with the lights, or is it going to be just like a old toggle? Like you need to know this detail. What are the paint colors going to be? What's the cabinet designs going to be? All those details tell people what to build. And you can think in a business like, what's your marketing plan? What's your sales plan? What's your operating plan? What's your finance plan? All of these need their own blueprints. So what you're doing as a leader is you're the architect, but you're not necessarily also the structural architect, the electrical architect, the landscape architect. Like, you need other visionaries inside your organization who can shore up your weaknesses and develop the plans accordingly. And as you're smaller, you kind of have to be, your plans are simpler, and maybe you have to do more. Like, you have to be the architect of those. And as you grow, you need sub-architects to kind of develop your plans and get better. But that's what it's all about. It's like, if you don't know what you're trying to build, it's not going to manifest on its own. Like, well, you have to describe it. And if you can't describe it, then nobody's going to build it. You're going to get the nothing you've described.
And I think that's why so many business owners are stuck being the firemen. They're constantly putting out fires, constantly having to direct everything and do all the work because nobody knows where they're going, how they're getting there, what the way of getting there is, and how the company should achieve those results because no one gave them a map. And so I can see how that is a massive struggle. And by you doing all these things, I'm assuming they all lead to a more profitable business. And you said so, because if you've got 17% margins, you're doing, and you've never been in the red, that's a pretty damn good track record.
We've been through a lot of stuff too, like the 08 banking crisis, obviously COVID, and never once, like not even one time, not through COVID. Like we never, and it's about discipline. But to track back to the first thing we said, like, once you have these plans and everybody's knows what they're trying to build, like, then that's your tower. That's, now you're inspiring the spirit of play. It's like there's a biological component to this. So the way that the dopaminergic system works is in relation to goal. Like, without a goal, your dopaminergic system is inactive. So, like, why is play? Play is just basically like, I see progress towards my goal. That's what emotion is for. Basically, it's like, oh, I'm working against my goal. That's negative emotion. I make progress towards my goal and I see it. That's positive emotion. That's what makes play. Like, if you don't have a goal, guess what? No play. Like, it's not. That's why video games are fun. That's why things are fun. Is so once you set these clear goals and people can start seeing movement towards them, personally, professionally. By the way, it's super important that the goal is shared. Like, it can't be, I don't know how big your businesses are, but it can't be 20 people with 20 separate goals. That's not play. Play is like a 20-piece band all playing to the same rhythm with harmony, all in the same time. That's fun. A basketball team or a football team playing together in a coordinated effort, that's play. A football team where everybody's doing something different and getting sacked, that's not play. That's miserable.
And if there's a game of football, I can assure you that there is one thing that everyone sees. It's a scoreboard. And without it, it's like a backyard game of who knows what. And that's the reality of it. You do have to do all of these things.
So that's where you and I think align on the profit thing. So like the profit to me, profit and growth, because to me it's like it could be one or the other. I'm kind of one of those guys in the private equity that kind of like the rule of. So let's say, when I look at it, it's not just profit, it's like profit or growth. Like I'd easily give up 4 points of profit for 4 extra points of growth, or vice versa. It's like, to me it doesn't really matter, so much. It's like, but I want to get, in our business model, it's like we want 17% profit. Really, we track EBITDA. So it's like 20% EBITDA, which tracks about 17%. It's about 3% gap. And then what we'd really like is to get about 14% growth, which would be a doubling every 5 years. And we've been on the Inc. 5000 10 different times too. So we didn't we didn't launch at 35 million. We launched at like 0. So, it took a lot of growth to get to 35 million. Now, the truth is, where we struggle most is actually not in our profit discipline. It's actually in our growth discipline. Like when we don't hit something, it's usually we don't hit 14% growth. Like a lot of years we get 6% or 8% or some sub 10%. And that's where my business has to like really kind of figure out go-to-market issues and stuff like that. But still, it's the combination. And that's the scoreboard. That's where how you know if you're winning. That's how you know if you're creating value in the universe. So going back to hey, lights have to be turned on. It's like, well, how do you know if you're doing a good job with your little section? It's like, well, what's the sum of your growth and profit? That's the universe telling you how well you're doing. And you need that measure. It's like, unless, by the way, there's a downside to capitalism, which there are business models that can, let's say, profiteer on net harm. So, like my big
no.
It's like the gambling, like the sports gambling industry, for example, is like one that's on my radar right now. And I think it's important for a corporation that wants to lead through vision and values to have something like a noble promise, like a guiding principle to say, we want to make profit, but we're not, this is the line, this is the constraint that we are going to agree to and align around. Ours is to help other people thrive. So it's like, okay, so like, does sports gambling help other people? The answer is no. So like we could make a lot of money in that, but we're not going to do it. It doesn't make any sense for us. So we have this kind of constraint on that side.
I am very much with you. I think we're in a lot more alignment. It's just a matter of how we explain it well. If people would like to learn more about your business and you, how do they do that?
Well, okay, great question. So yeah, I mean, a little commercial for Insight, I suppose. If you're a small or medium-sized business with less than 150 employees and you want ridiculously good IT support, I really believe, I'm not just saying this as a commercial, I really believe we're as good as there is at IT support nationwide. I've been part of peer groups all over nationwide. I'm on the CEO advisory council of billion-dollar software companies. I'm on private equity boards. I get to see this happen globally, and we're very, very good at this. So if you're interested in IT support, most people have something they're happy with. But if they're not, or they're shopping, you can find us at ensight.net. So that's ENDSIGHT.net. We can put a link probably in the bottom. But also we have 2 lines of businesses that I'm really, really, really excited about, kind of solving this growth problem of mine. One is where we now have a totally separate cybersecurity practice. Now, we do this for our existing customers, but we also do it for larger, more mid-market companies as well. So if people want just really amazing talent on the cybersecurity side, if they have regulatory issues, they can reach out to us for that. And maybe the one I'm most excited about right now is we launched this year, or kind of last year, I suppose. We just had a turn of the year, an AI consulting. So we're training your people how to use large language models to accelerate their performance. I think a large language model is a tool, much like a tractor. If it's sitting on your lawn, it's not very helpful. You need attachments to it. You need a mechanic. You need somebody to replace tires. Like you need an infrastructure to make it work in your farm. We're that. So we create a place to teach your people how to use the models. We do prompt sharing. We do ideation. So we help you figure out how to bring these things to life. And it's really not that expensive to have some training, and it's really valuable. We show you how to do it in a cyber secure way. But then second, once we get customers across that, we can do this agentic workflow which is basically we take a process in your business and we map the process, and then we figure out like what triggers the process, what the end result of the process is, and we figure out how we can use artificial intelligence to make that process much smoother. And we've done this internally, and we've done it for other customers. We saved so much money. Part of why our profits are good is we have a real efficiency bent internally, and so like we used to do timesheet review manually, and we've been able to automate about 80% of that. We have cleaner reports and all kinds of other stuff, and we've done it for like 80% of the effort. And so we can help transform people's business in the AI. So that's what we do. People are interested. That's insight.net. For me personally, I'm really excited. I'm launching a podcast. I've got 10 episodes. We're going to start releasing the episodes. And just over my 25 years in the industry, I've just met all kinds of incredible CEOs through YEO, YPO, my customer base. I bring them on. We talk about their first principles. We talk about the books that they love, how they lead. I have my own ideas, like the ones that we've talked about. I get their comments on that. They tell me what their ideas are. So just like this, if they like your podcast, they can't get enough of this kind of ideation around leadership and vision and values. That podcast is called First Principles. But you can find it. My YouTube channel is the Chaput Perspective, and that's where you can find that. We can make sure we have that on the kind of in the comments or whatever as well.
Cool.
And so that's how you find me. That's kind of what I'm into.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Rocky, it's my pleasure. And if I might, if you have a viewer and you got all the way here to the 48-minute mark and you like this kind of comment, like I used to be a person that never wanted to kind of engage in the internet because I didn't want it like manipulating me. But like, if you think this is good content, I really think it's incumbent upon you to thumbs up the content and to share it, to comment, interact with it, because that's how the internet knows it's useful. It's not garbage. Like it doesn't know on accident. It only knows when we go and crowdsource whether this is good content. So if you like this, you'd be doing Rocky, not just Rocky, a favor. That's the thing. It's like, oh, you think it's the creator that wants it, but it's really the whole world that needs to know whether something's good or not. So if it's good and you think it's good, thumbs up. And if you don't think it's good, then you could do a huge service by putting in the comments like what you thought would have been better. And so I just am a big believer in engagement. So if you got all the way here and you're not engaging, this would be a good time to subscribe to the channel, to like the show, to share it to a friend. That's how this game works.
Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Here's the truth. If you do nothing after this episode, nothing changes. You'll keep paying for the same bad choices. You'll tolerate the same underperformance and the same fuzzy math in your scoreboard. It's just another month in another new year with no change. So what are you going to do differently, and how are you going to do it? And who are you going to put on your team to ensure that it happens? Tired of scaling and growing beyond your cash? Ready to end the cash flow roller coaster and build real wealth inside and outside your business? We should talk. I serve 7 and 8 figure mission-driven business owners increase their profit and cash flow while working less. We help you build the businesses that run without you, so you work less and make more. Book your discovery call today. There's a link in the show notes. You'll work directly with me as your Chief Profitability Officer. If you're a 6-figure business owner, check out the Profit Blueprint program at profitcomesfirst.com. It's your guided path to mastering your numbers with my assistance at an affordable investment for your revenue. Check out my other podcast, Richer Soul. It covers leading yourself and building the ultimate life and business. There's also a link in the show notes. Thanks for listening to the podcast, where revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is king. Have a profitable week.